At 2 a.m., my stepbrother plunged a screwdriver into my shoulder. Agony rippled through me as my parents laughed. "Oh, stop being so dramatic." Blood dripped down as I sent one final SOS before losing consciousness. What followed left the entire courtroom stunned. Okay, take a deep breath, because this isn't just a story about pain. It's about the kind of betrayal that rips your world apart, then forces you to rebuild it, brick by bloody brick. Imagine lying bleeding, pinned to a wall by your own stepbrother's rage, and the only comfort your parents offer? Laughter. Their laughter. What happened next didn't just shake a courtroom. It shattered the very foundation of my life and set me free. My name is Kenya Mack, and at 19, I was a private in the United States Army. But on that suffocating Texas summer night, the battle found me not on some distant battlefield, but right inside my own childhood bedroom. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when Dylan, my stepbrother, kicked open my door. His face was a twisted mask of alcohol and pure, unadulterated hatred, and in his hand, a Phillips head screwdriver glinted ominously. He lunged, and the thrust aimed for my face, but found my shoulder instead. There was a sickening crack as it plunged through my right clavicle, pinning me to the wall like some grotesque butterfly. A scream tore from my throat, raw and primal, but the absolute worst part was yet to come. When my father, Thomas, and my stepmother, Evelyn, appeared in the shattered doorway, my eyes, wide with pain and terror, pleaded with them. It was a silent prayer. "Help me. Please help me." But they just stood there watching. And then Evelyn's voice, sickly sweet and dripping with venom, cut through the agony. "Oh, now, Kenya, honey," she cooed. "Don't be so dramatic." My father, he just sighed like I was an inconvenience. "Her brother's drunk," he muttered to Evelyn, not even looking at me. She always did love the attention. And then they laughed, just a low, shared chuckle. They had no idea that through the blinding pain, through the crushing betrayal, I had managed to send 3 little letters. SOS. A signal that would burn their fabricated world to ash. See, if family is supposed to be your safest harbor, mine was the source of my deepest pain. Before that door crashed open, before the world dissolved into splintered wood and blinding pain, there was a whisper. It slithered through the crack beneath my bedroom door, a venomous, drunken hiss from the hallway. "Think you're somebody now, huh, little soldier girl? Come back here to show off." Dylan's voice, thick with cheap beer, probably the PBR he favored, but the hatred in it was sharp enough to cut glass. I lay perfectly still on my bed, the thin sheets sticking to my skin in that oppressive San Antonio heat. The ceiling fan did nothing but stir the soupy, humid air. But my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a trapped bird beating itself against a cage. Every instinct, every ounce of my basic training screamed at me. Assess the threat. Identify egress routes. Neutralize. But I wasn't on a training field. I was in my childhood bedroom, the one with the faded floral wallpaper, and the monster outside was my stepbrother. So I did what the little girl inside me had always done. I played dead. I didn't answer, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore, that he'd just give up and stumble away. But silence to a bully isn't a deterrent, it's gasoline. The heavy thud against the door made me flinch. It was the sound of a shoulder, heavy and purposeful. "I know you're in there, you stuck-up bitch." My breath caught. This was different. This wasn't his usual verbal garbage, the casual insults tossed across the dinner table. This was something coiled and ready to strike. The doorknob rattled violently, a sound like shaking bones. I heard his grunts of frustration, then a moment of chilling silence. I knew what was coming. The explosion of the door flying off its hinges was so loud it felt like it shook the very foundation of the house. The cheap wood of the door frame splintered, and the door itself slammed against the interior wall with a deafening crack. He didn't just break a door. He shattered the last, fragile illusion that I could ever be safe here. He stood there in the ruined doorway, a hulking silhouette against the dim light of the hall. The air in the room instantly became thick, heavy with the stench of stale beer, sweat, and the electric charge of impending violence. The ensuing chaos wasn't a fight, it was a hunt. It unfolded in a terrifying, almost silent waltz of violence. The only sounds were ragged breaths and the soft thud of my bare feet on the hardwood floor. He lunged, and the screwdriver glinted under the moonlight filtering through my window. My training kicked in. I sidestepped, his clumsy momentum carrying him past me. My hand shot out not to strike but to control. My fingers tried to form a C-clamp on his wrist, to use his own weight against him. But he was bigger, he was heavier, and he was fueled by a blind, drunken rage that my disciplined training couldn't account for in this cramped space. He shook me off with a furious roar, my grip breaking easily. He swung again, and I dodged, my back hitting the wall. The cheap poster of the Andromeda Galaxy, which I'd had since I was 12, crinkled behind me. It was a dead end. I had nowhere else to go. I saw the third lunge coming. My hand came up to block, to parry, to do something, but I was a fraction of a second too slow. He shoved me hard against the wall, my head smacking against the drywall with a dull thud. For a dizzying, weightless moment, I was off balance. And in that moment, he struck. The final blow wasn't aimed at my face, but lower. The tip of the screwdriver connected with my right shoulder. There was no sharp slice of metal through skin. There was only a hideous, dry crack that seemed to vibrate through my entire skeleton, a sound louder than any gunshot. It was the sound of my clavicle snapping. The force of the blow drove the screwdriver through the bone and muscle, pinning my shoulder and me to the wall behind me. A scream, raw and primal, tore itself from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that seemed to have no end. But the physical pain, as blinding as it was nothing compared to the horror that came next. Footsteps pounded down the hall. My father, Thomas, and my stepmother, Evelyn, appeared in the shattered doorway. Hope, stupid and desperate, flared in my chest. They'll help me. They have to. My eyes, wide with pain and terror, pleaded with them. It was a prayer without words. Dad, Mom, please, I'm hurt. Help me. But the eyes that looked back at me didn't belong to parents looking at their injured daughter. They belonged to spectators looking at an inconvenience. My father's face was a mask of weary resignation. He sighed a long, put-upon sound, as if I'd just spilled milk on the carpet. Evelyn smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was a smirk of pure, triumphant malice. A victor's grin that said, "See, I told you you're nothing here." Then she spoke, and her voice was a slow, sweet poison. "Oh, now, Kenya, honey," she cooed, tilting her head. "Don't be so dramatic." The words sucked the air from my lungs. Dramatic? The world began to tilt, the edges of my vision blurring. Through the fog of pain, I heard my father's voice, devoid of all concern, piling on the verdict. "Her brother's drunk," he said, to Evelyn, not to me. She always did love the attention. And then they laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a low, shared chuckle of amusement between them. That sound, that soft, dismissive sound, was 1,000 times more brutal than the screwdriver in my shoulder. My father didn't just abandon me. He took the side of my attacker. He signed, sealed, and delivered the death sentence of our relationship with a laugh. Something inside me snapped, cleaner and more final than my collarbone. My left hand, my uninjured hand, was trembling uncontrollably at my side, but it moved with a will of its own. Fighting through the waves of shock and nausea, it found the cell phone in the pocket of my pajama pants. My thumb slid across the screen, clumsy and slick with sweat. 3 letters. SLS. It wasn't just a call for help, it was a vow. In that moment, as my parents' laughter echoed in my ears, the scared, hopeful girl named Kenya died on that floor, pinned to the wall of her childhood bedroom. And from the ashes of that betrayal, Private Mac, a soldier, was born. I hit send, not with the hope of being rescued, but with the cold, hard certainty of a sniper pulling a trigger. They would pay for this. The last thing I saw before the world faded to black wasn't my stepbrother's snarling face or the glint of the screwdriver. It was the smug, satisfied smile on my stepmother's face. The game had changed, and I had just fired the first shot. I drifted back to consciousness slowly, pulled from a deep, dark well of nothingness by a steady, rhythmic beeping. A machine. My eyes fluttered open, assaulted by the harsh, clinical glare of fluorescent lights overhead. The world was sterile. White walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the thin, scratchy blanket covering me. The pain in my shoulder was a dull, throbbing fire, a constant reminder of the metal, the bone, the betrayal. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. This cold, sterile loneliness, it was a horribly familiar feeling. It was a ghost that had haunted me for years. The beeping of the heart monitor faded into the background, and the cold of the room seeped into my bones, pulling me back through time, back for years to a different holiday, a different room full of people where I was just as isolated, not by white walls, but by the smiling faces of the people I called family. It was Thanksgiving. I was 15, and I was holding a miracle in my hands. It was a letter printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock from the University of Texas at Austin. An acceptance letter, not for college yet, but for their prestigious summer astrophysics program for gifted high school students. To me, it wasn't just a letter, it was a golden ticket. It was proof, tangible and real, that the girl who was always too quiet, too studious, too much, was not useless. It was a shield against the constant barrage of Evelyn's passive aggression and Dylan's overt contempt. I kept it folded in the pocket of my jeans all day, the crisp edges a secret comfort against my thigh. The house was buzzing with the chaotic energy of a typical American Thanksgiving. The rich smell of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie spice filled the air, mingling with the scent of my Aunt Carol's overpowering perfume. In the living room, the Dallas Cowboys were playing on TV, the drone of the commentators a constant backdrop to the loud, overlapping conversations of my relatives. For a few fleeting moments, surrounded by that noise and warmth, I allowed myself a dangerous fantasy, that I belonged, that I was a part of this. Dinner was a loud affair around the oversized dining table. The turkey sat in the center, perfectly browned. Bowls of mashed potatoes, gravy, green bean casserole, and cranberry sauce were passed from hand to hand. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, for the perfect moment. When there was a brief lull in the conversation, I took a deep breath, pulled the letter from my pocket, and slid it across the table to my father. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I got this in the mail." He picked it up, a flicker of confusion on his face as he read, and something incredible happened. He smiled, a real, genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. For a single, breathtaking second, I felt it, pride. "Well, I'll be," he said, holding up the letter. "Evelyn, honey, read this out loud. Let everyone hear what Kenya has been up to." That was the moment the trap was sprung. Evelyn took the letter, her expression one of beaming, maternal pride. She theatrically placed a pair of reading glasses on her nose, her red-painted nails tapping the paper. "Of course, dear," she chirped. She cleared her throat, commanding the attention of the entire table. "Oh, everyone, listen to this. Kenya has been accepted into the University of Texas's summer camp for cognitive special support." She delivered the line with perfect, saccharine enthusiasm. Isn't that just wonderful? We must always support her efforts, even if she is a little different. The words hung in the air for a single, silent heartbeat. My aunts and uncles exchanged confused glances. Then the dam broke. It started with a snicker from my cousin, then a nervous titter from Aunt Carol. Dylan, of course, threw his head back and roared with laughter, a loud, braying sound that filled the entire room. The dream shattered. I was frozen in my chair, the blood draining from my face. My entire world had just tilted on its axis. No, I stammered, my voice sounding small and foreign. That's not what it says. It's for gifted and talented students in astrophysics. Evelyn looked at me, her face a perfect mask of gentle concern. She reached across the table and patted my hand. "Oh, sweetie, don't be embarrassed," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We're proud of you no matter what." With that single, devastating sentence, she sealed my fate. She had taken my greatest achievement, the brightest star in my sky, and extinguished it, reframing it as a disability. And she did it with the loving smile of a saint. I felt the hot sting of tears welling up in my eyes. I looked desperately at my father, begging him to intervene, to correct her, to say something. But he just sat there, that rare smile gone, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable expression. He wouldn't meet my eyes. No one would. The rest of my family looked down at their plates or offered me weak, pitying smiles, fully believing Evelyn's cruel lie. A single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek, landing with a soft plop in my pile of mashed potatoes. It created a tiny, salty pool in the middle of the creamy white. That single tear was the loneliest thing in the entire world. That night, I was crying silently in my room when a soft knock came at the door. It was my father. Hope, that stubborn, foolish thing, flickered in my chest. He was here to apologize, to comfort me. But he didn't come in. He just stood in the doorway, his frame blocking the light from the hall. "You embarrassed Evelyn tonight," he said, his voice cold and flat. There was no warmth in it, no fatherly concern, just disappointment. "You know she didn't mean it. She was just trying to include you. Now you need to go out there and apologize to her for ruining the party." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. I was being ordered to apologize to the person who had just publicly humiliated me. My tears stopped. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I looked at the man who was supposed to protect me, and I finally saw him for what he was, a coward willing to sacrifice his own daughter for a moment's peace in his second marriage. That was the moment I learned that sometimes the deepest cuts don't leave a visible scar. If you've ever had a victory, big or small, turned into something ugly by someone who was supposed to be cheering for you, hit that like button to show some support and comment with a simple, "I see you" below. Because we all deserve to have our light acknowledged. I didn't go out and apologize. I stayed in my room and listened to the sounds of my family laughing downstairs. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I took the acceptance letter from my desk. I looked at the proud Longhorn logo of the University of Texas, at the words that had once felt like a promise of a brighter future. Then, slowly and deliberately, I tore it into tiny, irreparable pieces. I let the confetti of my broken dreams fall into the trash can. It was on that Thanksgiving night that I truly understood. In this house, my success was worse than my failure. It was a crime, and it was a scar I would carry long after the bruises faded. I thought joining the army would be an escape. I pictured a clean break, a place where my value would be measured only by my performance, my discipline, my strength. I was wrong. The ghosts of my past didn't just follow me to basic training at Fort Jackson. They enlisted right alongside me. They wore my uniform, slept in my bunk, and screamed in my ear louder than any drill sergeant. Basic training is a shock to the system by design. It's meant to break you down and build you back up. The problem was, I was already broken. The constant noise, the sleep deprivation, the physical exhaustion, that was all manageable. The real enemy was the one that lived inside my head. It happened most often on the obstacle course. We were low-crawling under barbed wire, mud seeping into our uniforms, our muscles screaming. My drill sergeant, a man whose voice was a permanent roar, got right in my face, his spit flying. "Mac, you are too damn slow. Are you weak?" In that moment, his voice faded, replaced by another, far more venomous. It was Evelyn's sickly sweet tone. The poor thing. Her voice echoed in my mind. She's just not built like the other kids. She has to try twice as hard. My arms turned to lead. My movements became sluggish. Then came the climbing wall. As I slipped, my boots failing to find purchase, I didn't hear the groan of my platoon. I heard Dylan's braying laughter from that Thanksgiving. Useless. The years of their psychological warfare had installed a saboteur deep within my psyche, an inner critic more relentless than any physical enemy. It whispered their words into my ear with every push-up, every grueling march, every failed attempt. I was on the verge of quitting, of ringing that bell and admitting defeat. A terrifying thought began to take root. What if they were right all along? What if I really was a weak, attention-seeking failure? The rope was my nemesis, a thick, unforgiving braid of twine hanging from a wooden scaffold. It seemed to mock me. Day after day I'd fail. I'd get a few feet off the ground, my arms burning, my grip slipping, and the voices would start their chorus. I'd slide back down into the dirt, the shame burning hotter than the South Carolina sun. One afternoon, after another pathetic failure, I was sitting by myself, cleaning my rifle and trying not to cry, when a shadow fell over me. I looked up to see Sergeant Ruiz. She spoke in a low, controlled voice that carried more weight than any shout. She didn't yell. She observed, her eyes sharp and dark, missing nothing. She stood there for a moment, watching me. I braced for a lecture. Instead, she knelt, picking up a small stone. Your problem isn't in your muscles. Private, she said, her voice calm. Her gaze was direct. It's up here. She tapped her own temple with her index finger. Who are you fighting on that rope? Is it you? Or is it some ghost you brought with you from home? The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was so accurate, it knocked the wind out of me. For the first time, I felt seen. She didn't see a failed recruit. She saw a soldier fighting a hidden war. I couldn't answer. I just stared, my throat thick with unshed tears. She held my gaze for another second, then stood. Figure out who the real enemy is, Mac, she said, and walked away. Her words rattled around in my head for days. A ghost you brought with you from home. She was right. I wasn't fighting the rope. I was fighting Evelyn's pity and Dylan's contempt. I was fighting the 15-year-old girl who had her dreams torn up in front of her. That weekend, during our brief, precious downtime, I escaped to the base library. It was a small, quiet sanctuary of order and knowledge. I was just browsing, looking for anything to distract myself, when a book cover caught my eye. Daring greatly by a researcher named Breen Brown. I'd never heard of her, but the title intrigued me. I sat down and started to read. It felt like someone had cracked open my skull and laid bare my deepest fears. I read about shame, about the fear of not being good enough. I read about how true courage wasn't about being fearless, but about showing up and letting yourself be seen, even when you can't control the outcome. Then I read one sentence that stopped my heart. Vulnerability is not weakness. I read it again. Vulnerability is not weakness. All my life I had been taught the opposite. To Evelyn, to my father, it was an inconvenience. To Dylan, it was a target. I'd come to the army seeking impenetrable armor, convinced that was the only way to be strong. But this book was telling me that the very thing I was trying to bury, my history, my hurt, my feeling of being broken, wasn't my weakness. It was the birthplace of my courage. It was a paradigm shift so profound it left me breathless. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness, I read, will we discover the infinite power of our light. A week later was our final test on the obstacle course. As I stood before the rope, my old, familiar dread began to creep in. I could already hear the ghosts whispering, "You're going to fail. You're not good enough." But this time a new voice answered them. It was quiet, but it was clear. Vulnerability is not weakness. I took a deep breath. The rough texture of the rope rasped in my palms. I started to climb. My muscles screamed. The ghosts started their assault. "The poor thing," Evelyn's voice cooed. I pulled myself higher. Useless. Dylan's laughter echoed in my ears. Another pull. My knuckles were raw. No, this wasn't a climb powered by biceps and grip strength. This was a climb powered by pure defiant will. Every upward pull was an act of rebellion. Every inch gained was me telling the ghosts from my past they had no more power over me. I wasn't the broken little girl anymore. I was a soldier. I was a fighter. When my hand finally closed over the top of the field, the shouts of the other recruits faded. For a moment, it was just me, hanging between the dirt and the sky. Then the silence was broken by a single whoop from someone in my platoon, and suddenly the air erupted in cheers. I slid down the rope, my hands burning, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Across the field, I saw Sergeant Ruiz. She wasn't cheering. She just watched me, and then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was more validation than my own father had ever given me. I had done it. I had conquered the rope. But as I stood there catching my breath amidst the celebration of my platoon, a new, unsettling question took root. I had conquered the rope, but how could I win this war when I couldn't even win the one inside my own head? The cheers of my platoon faded into a dull roar in my ears as I walked away from the rope. I had won. I had climbed the unclimbable, silenced the ghosts, and earned a moment of victory. But as I found a secluded spot on the bleachers overlooking the now empty training field, the adrenaline ebbed away, leaving behind a profound and unsettling hollowness. The victory felt like a single battle won in a war that had no end. The real enemy wasn't a rope in South Carolina. It was a permanent resident in my own mind, and that battlefield was a lonely, desolate place. I sat there, lost in thought, as the sky began to bleed from dusty blue into shades of orange and pink. The sounds of my platoon celebrating in the distant barracks only amplified my isolation. That's when I saw her. Sergeant Ruiz was walking toward me, her stride purposeful. She didn't say a word, just sat down on the bench a few feet away and handed me a cold bottle of water. The condensation was cool against my sweaty, calloused palm. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the last rays of sun disappear. "Friday night," she said finally, her voice even and calm, breaking the quiet. "My place. I'm making chili if you don't have plans." I turned to look at her, completely stunned. The words were so simple, so casual, yet they felt monumental. It wasn't an order. It wasn't a condescending offer of pity. It was just an invitation. In my entire life, I couldn't remember a single time an adult had invited me to their home with such straightforward, unconditional kindness. My family's invitations were always transactions, barbed with expectations and a hidden price tag. This was different. This felt like a lifeline, thrown quietly and without fanfare. I couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. On Friday evening, I stood outside her apartment door, my knuckles hovering in the air, suddenly terrified. What was I doing here? What would we even talk about? But before my anxiety could convince me to turn and run, the door opened. Sergeant Ruiz stood there out of uniform, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. She looked smaller somehow, more human. "Hey, Mac," she said with a small smile. "You found it. Come on in." The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not the sterile lemon scent of my stepmother's house, but something warm and rich and real. Cinnamon, cumin, and something else, like old books and worn leather. Her apartment was small and unassuming, but it felt lived in. A stark contrast to the perfect, magazine-ready prison I grew up in. There were no expensive paintings on the walls, just framed photos of Ruiz with her army buddies in various dusty, sun-bleached locations around the world. Souvenirs from her deployments were neatly arranged on a bookshelf. A painted Russian doll, a carved wooden elephant, a heavy-looking brass compass. A huge old German shepherd with graying fur around his muzzle lumbered over, sniffed my hand, and then leaned his entire body against my leg with a contented sigh. I instinctively started scratching him behind the ears. "That's Gunnar," Ruiz said. "Don't mind him. He's decided you're acceptable." She didn't pepper me with questions about my past or why I was so quiet. She just treated me like a normal person. She asked if I wanted a Coke, and we sat on her worn-out couch and talked about the most wonderfully mundane things. We complained about the Texas humidity and made fun of a cheesy action movie that was playing on her small television. She asked in the most casual way, "So, how are you feeling today?" And the question was so genuine, so free of any agenda, that it almost made me cry. When the chili was ready, we sat at her small kitchen table. She ladled a generous amount into a thick ceramic bowl for me, followed by a hefty slice of golden brown cornbread. The chili was dark and rich, with just the right amount of spice that warmed me from the inside out. As I took the first bite, a profound realization washed over me. This was the first meal I'd eaten in years where I wasn't on high alert. I wasn't mentally rehearsing my sentences, terrified of saying the wrong thing. I wasn't analyzing every facial expression, trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind a fake smile. The silence between us wasn't the tense, judgmental quiet of my family's dinner table. It was a comfortable, easy silence, filled only by the sounds of our spoons scraping against our bowls and Gunnar snoring softly on the rug nearby. It tasted better than any Thanksgiving turkey I had ever had. After dinner, we sat out on her small front porch in a pair of old rocking chairs, watching the fireflies begin to blink on and off in the humid twilight. It was in that quiet, safe space that the words tumbled out of me before I could stop them. "My family," I started, my voice barely a whisper, trembling slightly. "They think I'm a disappointment." I hadn't planned on saying it. The confession just broke free from the place where I had kept it locked away for so long. Ruiz didn't respond right away. She just rocked back and forth, the chains of the chair groaning softly. I held my breath, waiting for the pity, the judgment, the awkward platitudes. But they never came. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear in the darkness. "The Army doesn't care where you came from, private. We care where you're going. And the people who really matter will help you get there, not hold you back." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It felt like a physical weight, when I had been carrying on my shoulders for a decade, had just been lifted. Someone believed in me without needing proof, without asking for anything in return. Before I left that night, as I stood by the door, Ruiz held out a small, black, pocket-sized notebook and a pen. "If things at home get bad," she said, and her voice had shifted. It was no longer the off-duty friend, but the seasoned sergeant. It was serious, sharp, and strategic. Don't just take it. Document. Date, time, who said what, who did what. Turn your feelings into data. She met my eyes, and her gaze was intense. Data is ammunition, Mac. Never go into a fight without it.